Yes, I heard.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I think I learned a lot from all the previous speakers, and I think we all agree that this pandemic itself, as Professor Roger mentioned from the very beginning on, that it's not just the medical problem, but it's the problem that affects the society. So there's so many dimensions out there that we definitely need to take care of. And those dimensions could include things like the cultural differences, the political situation in the country, or even the strength of the law or the legal kind of like measures in the country itself. So in that sense, when you try to come up with the new measures or the new initiatives to help us get through this social problem together, communication is one of the key things to help us communicate with different stakeholders who may have different stances, different viewpoints, different interests. And Professor Parinya mentioned earlier that participatory communication is one of the ways that we will use to actually kind of like get people involved. And once they're involved, they feel that this problem is not just the problem for other people, it's a problem for themselves, that they need to have a stake in order to get through this and then share the responsibility as well. Okay, so thank you once again for inviting me to join this session. I don't have the slides, but let's just chat and talk here because I want to share with you some of the thoughts that I have, and then spare some time to have a discussion with other panelists at the end as well, because I learned a lot about the project from Thammasat University, and I want to ask some questions about that as well. So we share some similar projects at NUS when we deal with the pandemic too. To me, when we use communication to tackle this pandemic, um, there are so many things that we need to think about, but three key things that might help us to conceptualize the good communication would possibly be communication to manage the perception of the stakeholders, one thing. Second, communication or communicate to manage the emotions of the stakeholders. And third, communication to manage the information or disinformation, right? So I think those are the three key things that I would like to share in the next 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have a discussion or open the floor. I think people have different perceptions, and the perceptions that we all see from the news around the world after the pandemic flared up is you still probably remember some of the stories from the news where people in the West had a panic buying habits, and they fought for the toilet paper and stuff like that because they thought that when the pandemic strike their country, they kind of like they won't have this important item that they need for their daily lives. And in Singapore as well, I remember that about 2 months ago, whenever the government, the prime minister come out and have a press conference, the following day, not even for the following day, that particular night, all the products on the shelf in the supermarket will be all gone, right? And you can't compete even just to get into the queue. So how are you going to create the perception where people feel that, hey, there's no need to panic, there's no need to paranoid, as Ajahn Parinya mentioned earlier, right? So with that, a lot of governments or several governments from different countries use different labelings or different kind of terminologies to describe their measures, and that's the way to manage the perception of people. You heard the word lockdown. It's not very positive. And Ajahn Mark just mentioned the term, I think lockdown, right? That makes people feel that, yeah, we have to stay at home and we are locked inside home. And do you think that home is a safe place? No, it's not always a safe place, and it's not the safe place for everyone, right? Some people would even feel more resistant to being locked in their home, right? Some countries then use the word like stay at home or stay home orders, but still orders, right? Order from the government to do that. Singapore used the term circuit breaker, like the breaker in the electricity, like the circuit, like breaking the circuit of the pandemic and stuff like that, right? Those are the different levels that people use to describe their communication, to make the publics feel that yeah, this is something that we should do, should participate and stuff like that. So
And how do they feel when they use a term like a circuit breaker? It's a bit better than this lockdown, isn't it?
there's no research to support that, but I think in a way we feel all right with that term, and it seems acceptable to most people, right? And it will lead to the later part that I will discuss with you as well about the resistance of people, the emotions that emerge after using all those labels, right? And we heard the term. I don't know if you remember that there was a viral video that was spread out from medical staff in the US who said that don't call us the frontline workers. You yourself, the people in the society, should be the frontliners, because you should take full responsibility to fight the pandemic, not us. And in some way, that is the kind of like labeling, shifting the perception of people so that people can participate more proactively in trying to fight against this virus, for example. Okay, and the last thing that I just want to kind of like give an example for this communication to manage perception is at my university, the National University of Singapore. Right now, we are exiting the circuit breaker stage at the moment, and then we are running the initiative called the Resilience and Growth Initiative to help the graduates, the students who are graduating this year, to get through this difficult economic situation. And we give them like free short courses to help them upskills themselves while waiting for the job, and then we kind of like get some support from the government. So resilience, growth, that kind of like gives them the sense of hope and look through the future, to the future, that we can get through this together. All right. Enough said about the perception here for communication, because that's quite an important thing. People will.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
I will just let you know about it. We've got around 13 minutes left for the whole session. Yes.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. The second part is communicate to manage emotions, right? Some of my colleagues here here in Singapore just conducted a study to look at the tweets of people, about 20 million something tweets around the globe, starts from the beginning of the pandemic, and look at like how people feel. And of course, people feel fear is one of the key emotions, right? But fear is declining. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Declining. At the beginning, people have the fear, but right now people might get used to it. But what is the emotion that is rising? Can you guess?
Yeah.
Anger.
Anger.
Yeah, people get more and more angry.
Anger about who?
All right, that's a good question, because in that study, after they look at the statistics of the rising of the emotion, they look at the stories that people share as well. The first thing that during the first period when anger is still kind of like low, it was because people had that xenophobia. They are angry at the kind of like they have that stereotype about who caused the virus and stuff like that. So anger came from that, but that was still low because it was suppressed by other people who are more open-minded and stuff like that. But recently, anger is rising because people have that isolation fatigue. They have been staying home for too long, and you can see that in America or many other countries, people come out and protest. I don't want to be locked down, stuff like that. So anger came from that. With that, I think communication in this sense, right, need to really kind of like try to analyze the emotions of the stakeholders in different stages, and then try to create the message that really tackle their feelings, because the stakeholders here will be probably like antagonistic to your measures. All right, let me jump to the last one because we are running out of time here, is to communicate in order to manage information. I think Thailand is doing pretty well. Many countries are doing pretty well in trying to update their publics, their citizens about like what's going on in the country, what is the statistic for this day and that day. But more importantly, with the pandemic, disinformation, fake news, or misinformation came up as well. And we can't ignore the importance of communicating to manage this misinformation. I may not have to get through this study, but there's a study conducted by my colleague at the Department from Communications and New Media with my department chair as well, where they compare strategies in China, in Singapore, and in Korea, in South Korea, how these countries use different strategies to combat fake news or misinformation after the pandemic. And I think that is something we need to pay attention to. All right, so I will just leave the food for thoughts here, and then we'll use the last few minutes to discuss any issue that may arise. Don't forget that communication will need to help us manage the perception of stakeholders, emotions of them, and then the information that is floating around, whether or not it's true or it's fake. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for your controllable. Very, very nice for me to have plenty of time for chatting. For the last one, Dr. Subhishit, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, that communication in this difficult time would need to take into consideration the perception, the emotions, and the misinformation that is floating around. At the same time, I think there are two key things to leave with you here is that when we do public communication for the pandemic situation or difficult situation like this for the whole country, we have to remember that communication alone is not working in silos. It works within the cultural, national, legal, political context. What we say will be affected by all those dimensions. And at the same time, when we select one message, we may not be able to please a certain group of stakeholders. But all in all, once we do that, it will help us to reflect upon like who was missed in the previous communication, in the previous campaigns and all that, who were the vulnerable group. For example, in Singapore, we think that we have a strong economy and all that. During the first phase, Singapore did so well. So many countries praised Singapore, but recently the number went up because the way migrant workers are treated is not good, for example, and that gives us the opportunity to reflect on this loophole in the society and come back to fix it. Don't waste this opportunity of the pandemic that we get through and overlook all those social problems that we have been ignoring for quite some time. Use it to reflect and do better in the future.
Yes, it's very nice conclusions. Thank you very much indeed for the all honorable panelists.